The wind crawled across the prairie like I half remembered him, brushing over dry fence posts and brittle grass with a hush of something too old to name. It slipped beneath the warped floorboards of Silas McCaw's porch, curled around his boots, and reached up as if to coax the man back into the world. He didn't move. Not at first. He sat still as stone in a rocker long worn smooth, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun bled out behind blue hills. His face bore the leathery creases of a man who had spoken more with cattle than people for too many winters, and his hands, calloused, quiet, rested on a half-whittled piece of cedar he'd been carving for years but never meant to finish. They said he hadn't set foot in dry willow in near a decade, not since the fever took his boy, and grief carved hollows in him too deep for time to reach. Folks whispered about the rancher on the hill, how he talked to ghosts and let his cattle wander, how the wind never left his land. Some claimed he buried something out by the north field. Others swore he was just waiting to die. But Silas wasn't waiting for anything. He was surviving the only way he knew how, quiet, alone, without the weight of eyes or pity. The sky turned purple as dusk crept in, and somewhere a lone coyote gave a mournful yip. Silas stood, bones creaking in protest, and stepped down into the yard. The dry earth cracked beneath his boots. He checked the barn locks, the troughs, the back gate. Routine wrapped around him like a threadbare quilt. Old, familiar, fraying at the edges. It was on his way back to the house that he heard it. The faint, rhythmic groan of wagon wheels and the sharper, stuttering clop of a tired horse. He froze. No one came this way. Not by accident. Not unless they were lost. The wagon crested the ridge, its silhouette stark against the dying light. A single lantern swung from the side, throwing flickering gold across the trail. Silas narrowed his eyes. There were figures, 5 of them, bundled against the wind, shawls pulled high, bonnets shadowing their faces. Women. One drove. The others huddled close on the bed of the wagon. He didn't move to greet them, just watched, like a deer too long hunted. The wagon rolled to a stop near the fence. For a long moment, nothing stirred but the wind. Then the driver stepped down, tall, composed, with a kind of strength that didn't ask permission. She was older than the others, maybe mid-40s, with silver in her braid and a face weathered not by years but by endurance. She approached the gate slowly, her hands open at her sides. "Sir," she said, voice steady but soft, "we're not looking for trouble, just shelter. One night, our axle cracked about 5 miles back, and there's a storm coming behind us." Silas said nothing, just stared. She didn't flinch. "There's 5 of us," she continued. "We'll sleep in the barn if it's dry. We've got food. We won't take more than we need." He studied her in silence, noting how the others stayed still in the wagon. Tired shapes tucked into shadows, waiting for a lead. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with disuse. "Storm's rolling fast. Wind'll tear through that barn like paper. We've weathered worse," she said, but her eyes flicked briefly to the youngest of them, a girl barely more than 20, pale and trembling even beneath layers of fabric. Silas looked past her toward the wagon. One woman was curled up, arms wrapped around her belly. Another clutched a satchel like it held her whole life. They were worn, dust-covered, and quiet in a way that said they'd learned not to ask too much of men. He exhaled hard through his nose and turned toward the house. "Inside," he muttered. "You'll freeze out here." Relief passed over the older woman's face, but she didn't smile, just nodded. "Thank you, Mr. McCaw." "Clara Wynne," she replied. "We're obliged." Inside, the house held the cold of long neglect. A fire still crackled low from earlier, the scent of cedar and ash drifting lazily. Silas lit 2 more oil lamps. Their glow pooled in soft amber puddles on the wooden walls, illuminating dust motes and shadows that had grown too comfortable. The women entered slowly, each one pausing to take in the space. There was no welcome in the walls, but there was warmth, and that was enough. "Thank you, Mr. McCaw," one whispered, a woman with red-rimmed eyes and a limp in her step. He nodded once and sat in his chair again, back to the fire, eyes on nothing. He didn't ask their stories. He didn't need to. They wore grief like second skin the same way he did. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft clink of tin cups and the rustle of shawls. Then came a sound he hadn't heard in years. A hum, low, hesitant, and impossibly gentle. It came from a tall, hollow-eyed woman named Delphine, who rocked slightly in her seat, humming a lullaby to no one. Her voice didn't seek attention. It simply existed, a thread of something tender woven through the silence. Silas stared into the hearth, and something behind his ribs ached. He remembered that tune. It had floated from his wife's lips on long-ago nights, just before the fever took their son and the world collapsed inward. A sudden clatter broke the moment. One of the women, Pearl, the softest of them, had dropped her tin cup. It rolled to Silas's feet. Without thinking, he bent to pick it up. Her eyes met his, startled. He held it out, fingers steady despite the tremble he felt inside. "Thanks," she whispered, voice barely audible. He just nodded. The wind howled outside like a wounded thing. The walls shuddered. The house held firm. Later, as the women spread their bedrolls across the floor and wrapped themselves in borrowed quilts, Silas remained awake in his chair. He didn't trust sleep, not with strangers, not with memories so close to the surface. Clara passed him a folded blanket. "You should rest, Mr. McCaw." "Don't sleep much," he said. She didn't press. But before she stepped away, she added, "It means something what you did, letting us in. Some wouldn't." He shrugged. "A storm don't care who you are, only what it can take." Clara paused at that. Then softer, "Sometimes it leaves things behind, too." She walked away, leaving it with a fire and a thought he hadn't dared entertain in years. The wind roared louder. Thunder grumbled in the distance. He should have felt uneasy. But for the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel like punishment. He leaned back, let his eyes close for just a moment, until a sound, faint but clear, sliced through the hush. A child's cry. Short, fragile, real. His eyes snapped open, and from the shadows where the youngest widow slept came the sound again. Morning came slow, dragging light across the horizon like a tired hand brushing over forgotten skin. The storm had passed, leaving behind puddles in the low ground and a smell of wet cedar in the air. The widows stirred in silence, rising from quilts and makeshift bedding, their eyes rimmed red but grateful. Silas had barely slept, his chair tilted just enough to catch the warmth of the hearth, his dreams unsettled by the sound that still echoed in his ears. A baby's cry, soft and unmistakable. He hadn't spoken of it. Not yet. Clara moved through the house with quiet authority, folding blankets, organizing cups, her every motion wrapped in purpose. She didn't ask permission to help. She simply did, and the house seemed to breathe more evenly for it. Delphine took to the windows, wiping away condensation with the hem of her sleeve, staring out the hills like they owed her an answer. Letty chopped carrots with the precision of a surgeon, her eyes flicking off into the door. Pearl swept, humming the same half-lullaby from a night before, her tune trembling like her hands. Only the youngest, Mabel, lingered by the fire, face pale, eyes dim. She kept one arm tied across her middle, as if holding something in place that might otherwise break free. Silas moved through the space like a man unsure of his own bones, half invisible in his own home. He poured coffee into tin cups and placed them where they were needed, not looking anyone directly in the eye. Yet something inside him had shifted, a wordless ache, a stirring that crept up his throat and made his silence feel heavier than before. "You don't ask much," Clara said, breaking the quiet as she accepted her cup from his hand. Silas shrugged, eyes on the window. "Ain't much to ask." She studied him a moment, then nodded as if she understood far more than he meant her to. Outside, the wagon stood half-mended, its axle propped up with stacked rocks and lengths of rope. Letty had been working on it since dawn, her sleeves rolled, her brow furrowed in that way people wear when they've been let down too many times to hope aloud. Silas offered her a crowbar from the tool shed. She nodded once, neither thanks nor request spoken, but both understood. Inside, Pearl found piano. It sat beneath a sheet in the corner of the parlor, its legs warped slightly from years of neglect. She touched the cloth gently, as though lifting a veil off a casket. Silas almost stopped her, almost said no, but she pulled it back before he could speak, and dust plumed into the air like a blessing. Her fingers, shaky, bird-like, rested on the keys. She pressed one. It rang out sharp, off-pitch, but true. She began to play. The melody wasn't grand. It limped more than flowed, a broken waltz that remembered what it once was. Yet the room leaned in. Delphine stopped wiping windows. Clara closed her eyes. Even Letty, outside, paused with her hand braced on the wheel. Silas stood frozen in the doorway. The sound dug into his chest like a spade. He remembered that piano, his wife's fingers dancing across it on summer evenings, their boy laughing, clapping to the rhythm. The last time it had been played, the house was full of life. Now it was only the ghosts who listened. Pearl played until her hands shook too much to continue. Then she let them fall into her lap and looked away, ashamed. "It's out of tune," she whispered. "No," Silas said quietly. "It's honest." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not recognition, but kinship. The kind born not from knowing someone, but from knowing the same kind of pain. Later, as the women prepared a midday meal, Mabel collapsed. It happened without warning. 1 minute she was beside the hearth, folding linens. The next, she was on her knees, doubled over, her breath coming in short gasps. Silas was the first to reach her. He knelt, unsure where to touch her, afraid of hurting her more. "Get her some water," he murmured, and Clara was already moving. Mabel tried to speak, but no words came. Only a low sound, half sob, half prayer. Clara returned with the water, and Silas helped her sip. The girl's lips trembled as she drank. "Don't be mad," Mabel whispered, looking not at Silas, but Clara. "No one's mad, child," Clara murmured, brushing sweat from her brow. Mabel's hand moved to her belly. That's when Silas knew, not in the way a doctor knows, but in the way a father does. That cry last night hadn't been a dream, and Mabel wasn't just tired. She was hiding a truth the world had punished her for before. The silence in the room grew dense, like smoke. Clara straightened slowly, her shoulders bracing against what she knew was coming. "She's due in a few weeks," she said. "Maybe sooner. We didn't plan it this way." "She's just a girl," Silas muttered, the words catching on something sharp at his throat. "She's stronger than most grown men I've met," Clara replied. No one spoke after that. The fire cracked. Outside, the wind had gone still. When Mabel was settled on a cot by the window, Pearl sat beside her, threading fingers through hers. Delphine stood guard near the door, face unreadable. Letty, red-faced, kicked the barn wall until dust shook loose from the beams. Silas remained in the corner. That night, he laid a tin cup of honeyed water at Mabel's bedside. He didn't say a word. She didn't open her eyes. But she reached for it, drank, and whispered, "Thank you." The words were barely audible, but they pressed against a part of him that still ached from his wife's last breath. From bearing a child he never heard speak more than a dozen words. He hadn't known what to do then. He barely knew now. But maybe doing something, anything, was better than silence. He stepped outside, air cold against his skin. The stars were sharp and bright, like shattered glass scattered across the heavens. From inside, faint music drifted again. Pearl at the piano, playing not for an audience but for herself. He looked back at the house. For the first time in years, its windows glowed warm. But down the trail, just beyond the fence, he saw the glint of lanterns, 3 of them, bobbing slow and deliberate toward his land. The knock came just after sundown. 3 sharp raps, deliberate and bone-deep, like a judge's gavel against the front door of a life already on trial. Silas stood in the hallway, the echo of it running through him like a chill draft. He glanced toward the parlor, where Pearl played him too slow to name, her fingers weaving comfort into the walls. In the back room, Mabel rested fitfully, her breath shallow, her hand pressed to the swell of her stomach. Clara and Delphine hovered nearby, tending her with a kind of sacred quiet that felt older than medicine. Another knock. Firmer now. Letty moved to the window, pulled back the curtain with the edge of her sleeve. 3 of them, she said, voice low. On horseback. Lanterns lit. One's wearing a sheriff's star, but not one from around here. Silas didn't need to look. He felt it in his bones. Men like that didn't come to parley. They came to claim. He opened the door without a word. The wind slipped past his boots like an omen. The first man dismounted and stepped forward. Clean-shaven, eyes like boiled bone, a star pinned to his chest more out of vanity than justice. Behind him stood two others, rifles slung casual but ready. "Evenin'," the lead man said, his voice carrying that manufactured civility used to bait a trap. "Name's Deacon Brill. We're looking for 5 women passed through Dry Willow. One's heavy with child. Word is they took things that didn't belong to 'em." Silas didn't blink. "Ain't seen thieves," he said, his voice iron flat. Brill smiled thin. "Now, I'm sure you mean well, mister?" McCaw. "Ah, heard of you. Thought you were dead." "Not yet." Brill's eyes flicked past him toward the glow inside. "Funny thing, though, wagon tracks lead straight to your land. You wouldn't be harboring fugitives, would you?" Behind him, the other men chuckled, low and mean. Silas stepped forward, boots crunching over grit. "They're not fugitives. They're women, and they've done no wrong here." Brill's grin faded. "This ain't about your land, McCaw. It's about order. Some folk don't get to drift free when others carry the weight." "Their husbands died in a fire," Silas said. "They didn't set it. Didn't say they did." Brill's tone shifted. Slippery now. "But bad luck clings to some folk, don't it? Wherever they go, trouble follows." Silas let the silence thicken. "Then, if trouble's what you came for, I reckon you found it." One of the men reached for his rifle. The sound of a shotgun cocking split the air like thunder. Letty stood on the porch now, both hands steady, eyes narrowed to slits. "That gun lifts another inch, and I swear I'll put you on your back before the trigger clicks." Brill raised a hand, placating. "No need for hostility. We'll go, but understand, if they're still here by morning, you'll be seen as complicit. That carries weight with the law." "They've carried worse," Silas said. The men turned, mounting slowly. They disappeared into the dark, their lanterns bobbing down the trail like fading regrets. When the door closed again, the house exhaled. Letty leaned the shotgun against the wall. "They'll be back." "I know," Silas said. In the parlor, Pearl stopped playing. Her fingers still on the keys. Silence crept in around them. Later, after Claire returned from tending to Mabel, she found Silas out by the fence, fixing a loose rail with more force than necessary. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside him, watching his hands move like they were trying to beat back time. "I should have turned you away," he said finally. "Would have been easier, but not right." He stopped. "You don't owe me anything." "No," she agreed, "but you gave us shelter. That means something." He nodded. The stars blinked overhead like old truths too tired to shine. He wanted to tell her about his boy, how he died without a sound, how the world had gone mute afterward, how he buried not just a child but the man he used to be. But the words wouldn't come. Clara spoke into quiet. "You think kindness makes you weak. It doesn't. It makes you real." She walked back inside, leaving the gate swinging behind her. Morning came brittle with frost. Mabel's pains had started, slow at first, then sharper. Delphine took charge, her voice firm, her hands gentle. Clara boiled water. Pearl whispered prayers. Letty stood guard at the window, eyes sharp as nails. Silas paced the porch. At midday, Mabel's cry rang through the house, a sound as ancient as time, as raw as birth itself. Then another sound followed, softer, higher, a newborn's wail. The house held its breath. Inside, Clara emerged with the child bundled against her chest. Her smile was weary but full. "She's perfect," she said. Silas stared at the bundle. Something in him cracked. He stepped forward, slowly, carefully, reached out a hand that had once rocked a cradle and buried a dream. The child's eyes blinked open, blue as the high country sky. Mabel, pale but smiling, whispered from the cot, her name's Hope. No one corrected her. No one needed to. That night, the fire burned long past dusk. The child slept nestled between quilts, The house quiet except for the occasional coo or shifting creak of wood. Silas sat in his chair, eyes on the flames. The others had turned in, but sleep felt too far off, too fragile to chase. He rose and walked to the mantel. The cedar box still waited. He opened it. Inside, the letters remained, folded tight. He pulled one free, hands trembling slightly, and unfolded the page. His wife's handwriting curled across the paper like ivy. If you ever find yourself lost, Silas, if the world goes too quiet, just remember, even broken ground can grow something new. He stared at the words until they blurred. Then, gently, he laid the letter in the fire. It curled, blackened, and turned to smoke. Behind him, a knock sounded once more. He turned slowly, heart steady. This time, the voice was different. Young. Male. Unsure. Mr. McCaw? My mama said I should come ask if there's work, and if the baby's okay.